Your Excellencies, Prime Minister, Cabinet colleagues and parliamentary colleagues, the Leader of the Opposition, the Charge of the United States of America, the Representative of the United Kingdom, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies all. This is both a personal journey and a story of public policy. The personal journey first. When the events that we mark today took place, I was 9 years old. It is in fact my earliest recollection of my passion for politics and public policy. I was a student in the then Eastern Junior School, now known as Palmdale Primary, and each day I would walk to school from my parents' home in Collins Avenue. On the way there, I would pass through Carew Street, and my closest primary school friend, the now Dr. Austin Davis, and I would walk to school together. And we would talk about the events of the day. And I remember one morning as we walked to school, we talked about what later became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, because the Bahamas was at the epicenter of those events. Because as we walked to school, US planes were flying in formation high over our heads. I called Dr. Davis yesterday and asked him if he would come today and if in fact my recollection was correct. He is unfortunately traveling on a family vacation, but he remembers the events and the planting of the tree by the US president. So it gave me some comfort that I did not invent this story. We and a whole cohort of young men and women were raised in the age of John F. Kennedy, with our early beliefs formed in the crucible of a youthful American president, and the words he said, later I would learn, and the words he said. Later, I would learn his inaugural speech of 1960 when I was a student at St. Augustine's College, and I think we all remember the words, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And I am also of that generation that remembers where they were the day the president was shot and died in Dallas, Texas. Later still, I was a student at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, where his words were penned at the gate. Now, the public policy. Each month, the diplomats of the Bahamas and those of the United States of America meet at a monthly luncheon meeting. The idea for refurbishing this site was first put to the embassy as a joint project back in August of this year, as a symbol of the close cooperation between the two countries. John Dinkelman, the Charge d'Affaires, immediately agreed and found resources for the joint project. And I wish to pay tribute to him and the embassy staff for their assistance in making this event possible. It was in that forum that I proposed this larger theme, that this event, which happened 50 years ago, was one of a number of events that put the country, the Bahamas, for a brief moment in time, at the center of the news of the world. I posited that as an amateur historian of our country's policies of the 20th and 21st century, and looking toward the 40th anniversary of our country's independence, that part of the retrospective on who we are should look and examine those events which put the Bahamas at the center of our international life. One event was the fact that the former King of England and Emperor of India, David Windsor, abdicated and then came to the Bahamas as governor in 1940 and stayed here until 1945. And during that time, Sir Harry Oakes, reportedly the richest man in the empire, lived here and was unfortunately murdered here on the 7th of July, 1943. And that murder trial put us at the center of the world again. The murder was never solved, and next year will be the 70th anniversary of that murder. It would be an interesting time to look back and examine the kind of the Bahamas that we had in the age just before I was born and just before the advent of the era of party politics in the Bahamas. It was during that time that the Burma Road riots of 1942 took place that changed the social face of our country. And if I'm correct, we are sitting at the end of Burma Road as we speak today, now called Blake Road. I think we ought to do a symposium on that period as part of our observances on our 40th independence anniversary next year. Another time that we were at the center of events was when the deposed Shah of Iran ended up living in the Bahamas at Paradise Island for 3 months while he looked for a permanent home. The then Secretary of State for the U.S., Henry Kissinger, who now vacations annually in the Bahamas, called the late Sir Lyndon Pinling, Prime Minister at the time in 1979, and asked if the ally and friend of the United States, the Shah, could live here while they found a permanent place for him to live. It was not universally accepted, and there were demonstrations in town about it, but there was palpable excitement, and once again, an example of us being at the center of the world. And then there are other social events, like Sidney Poitier winning the Oscar in 1963. He was Reg Poitier's boy from Cat Island. The Beatles vacationing in Nassau, and Sean Connery, the then star of the James Bond films, choosing Nassau as his hangout, and now it too is his permanent home. Also, UN Representative from the Harlem District, Adam Clayton Powell, visited Bimini frequently and lived there. And Dr. Martin Luther King wrote his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech in the marshes of Bimini back in 1968. All of these events helped to shape who and what we are as a country today. The mix of descendants of Africa, some brought here as slaves, others as artisans from the West Indies, others set down as liberated Africans, others fleeing the poverty of Haiti, together with the Europeans who settled here, the Americans who fled their country after the Revolution, and the wealthy who came here in the 20th century to protect their wealth and enjoy the climate and to live in privacy. That is part of what the Bahamas is in our 40th year. The final point, an even larger theme. Let me remind all of us that we pass this country on to another generation. It took me 50 years from those days that I walked to school at Easton Junior to reach this platform. Clearly, at 9 years old, the ideas about who and what I was and what I would be were forming at that age. It is counterintuitive to suggest that the same is not going on with 9-year-olds today. It is, I hope, a lesson to all who have the good fortune of being parents and to those of us who govern, that young people form their ideas from early. It is therefore never too soon to help those ideas form in their minds for positive and for good. I trust then that the message will go out from this place that our job is to help to train the next generation, to pass on to them a country of liberal democratic values, of tolerance, and of social mobility. One of our founding fathers is here today in the person of our Governor General. He and his generation inspired us. Another, those who helped behind the scenes, is Dr. Eugene Nuri, one of our ambassadors, and he is here today. I hope that we in this time are fortunate enough to so inspire the next group that comes along. In fact, I am certain of it as I pen and speak these words, because I thank, in that connection, the young Foreign Service officers of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Museum and Antiquities Corporation, its chair, Courtney Strawn, and our own permanent secretary, Philip Miller, for their invaluable assistance and dedication in making this day a success. I wish to thank also my dear friend Sibylla Clark, who, as a resident of the Bahamas since the 1950s, was able to recall the social history of this event and was always on the phone, always a call away when I wanted to check something that was not in the history books. And she too is here today, and I'm glad she's able to make it. So thank you all very much indeed.